Okay, so now if we go ahead and we collect some of these pickup items, like so, let's go check the inventory by going to the Godot engine, remote view, game level, player, and we look at inventory. And we'll see that we're picking up the resources now because our dictionary has items. You can see that the resource is being stored here as a object. It's a little hard to tell exactly what this is looking at the inspector view, but we can see that we picked up 2 of that item. So seeing the objects here is a lot easier when you would be looking at, let's say, the debugger view. So if we, let's say, look at the inventory script and we have the bit here where we're adding something to the inventory, let's add the debugger point at that point and let's go collect another resource. Okay, so now it's going to stop at that breakpoint and we can see the object here represented outside of the dictionary. So you can just click on the object and you can see what type it is here. Rock with a texture. So out of the box, looking at the dictionary might not be the most convenient way of seeing how many objects you have of which type. So what we could actually do is create a in-game UI so that we could see how many of each resource we have picked up. So let's go ahead and exit out of the game now, and we will do that. So let's go up to scene, new scene, and do a user interface. So we have the control node here. I'm going to change the type of it to something a little bit more useful. Let's right click and change type. So let's expand the control nodes, go into container and find a container that would be useful for showing a whole bunch of icons with how much we have in the inventory. So I think we'd be looking for something like a grid container. We can try that. So let's change it to a grid container. For columns, we can just decide how many items we want to go across before we jump down to a new row. So I'll say something like 5 for now is fine. We can rename this to be resource display. Okay, and now let's Control S, save this in our project. So I'll create a folder for UI and we can just call it resource display.tscn. So in our resource display, we're going to want a little side-by-side with a label showing a number and then something like a sprite showing the texture of the resource so that we know how much of that resource we have. We could also add in the name of the resource, optional if we want that. So I'm going to right click here and do add child node, and let's go into control. So we'll need another subcontainer for that. Let's go to container, and then we can do box container and horizontal box container. So this will make each item go horizontal, I believe. Let's try that. And then under this, we'll right click add a child node. So let's get a label for the number and I'll right click on HBox container again. And let's see what we can use for showing an image. So under control, we have texture rect. I believe that's what we want. So let's create that. I'm going to reparent the texture rect to be above the label. So the image comes first. And then let's create a little sample here so that we can see how it will look in the actual thing. So let's go to art, gathers exterior, resources, and let's grab something like coin copper here. I'll drag that in. Okay, so we can see that this is stretching the icon in a way we don't want. Let's go to stretch mode, scale, and do keep aspect. Okay, that looks a little better. And now let's go to the label and put 0 for the number. Let's rename the HBox container to be, let's say, resource item display, I guess. Okay, and if we duplicate this a few times, then you'll see roughly how the UI would start to look. If we zoom out all the way, then we'd have this little UI in the top left-hand corner, and it would be going to the right. Now, of course, we can see that our icons are too small. I'm going to delete resource item display 2 and 3. Don't need those right now. So next, let's go to the texture rect, and let's fix the sizing of our little icon here. I'm going to go to expand mode, and let's try fit height proportional, or no, fit height. And then let's do fit width. We could try fit width proportional. Okay, that looks good. And then we have the number over here. So we'll need to kind of make this bigger than it is right now. Okay, so we can check how big it's going to look in game now by running the current scene. Remember that in our window settings, the scale is increased by 4 times or so. So that's why it appears so big here compared to here. Now, we probably don't want these grid items to show at the very top left corner. So maybe we can add a margin around our grid box. Let's go to the resource display. I'll right click, add a child node. Let's look for margin container. Okay, and then drag resource item display under the margin container. And in our margin container, let's go to, let's see, theme overrides constants, and let's set some margins here for all 4 directions. And let's try 10, 10, 10, 10. So with that, now our actual grid items are inside of this larger container. If we run the scene, it's going to, I mean, it's kind of big, but that'll be a lot better, at least. So now we're going to need a couple scripts, one for the resource item display so that when we set a resource and a value here, that those will be updated to the texture and the number here. And then one for the resource display where we'll have it listen to the player's inventory, and whenever the values change in the inventory about how many resources the character has, then we're going to update the display. So let's right click on resource item display and do a new script so we can attach a script. And we'll save this under UI/resource item display.gd. Okay, let's save that there. So I'll get rid of this stuff down here. And what we're actually going to want here is going to be a class name. So we'll call it resource item display. Then down here we'll have our resource type, which we'll have to get the item type. So let's see, items, resources, we were calling it resource item. So if we do, resource item here, then that'll be good. By default, it's nothing. We'll also need a couple onReady vars. So onReady var of type texture rect equals $texture rect. And then we'll need the label onReady var label type label equals $label. We could also create a simple function down here, function update count. And this will take a count as an integer. And then we take the label.text and we set that equal to the count. We might need to make that a string. So let's do str of count. Not sure if that's actually required or not, but just in case. All right, so that'll update the label there. And now we need to create a script for the resource display. So let's attach a script to resource display. So the first thing we can have here is going to be a list of resource item displays. So that will be an array. So var resource item displays, or we could just call it displays actually, and that'll be of type resource item display equals an array of resource item display. So what we'll do with this is that whenever the player inventory adds a new type of resource, we'll create a new resource item display. So for that, we need the template, which is what we created already, and then we'll create a new copy of that under the margin container. So let's add an export var for item display template, which is going to be of type, no, not resource item display, actually, it's a packed scene because it's from the project. Now we can click on resource item display and we can set the item display template. So we have to save our resource item display to the project. So I'll right click here, save branch as scene under UI, and we'll just save this here. Okay, now we can remove the resource item display from our scene because we don't want it to be there by default. And instead on resource display, let's go to the UI folder and let's grab the resource item display and just drag that in there. So we have the template, and we'll create an instance under the margin container whenever we have a new type of resource. We don't need ready and process functions, so let's get rid of that. We are going to need the margin container. So at onReady var, and maybe I'll call it something like display container inside of here, which is going to be of a type margin container. And we're going to look for $, we'll rename it to be display container. So let's make sure that's the name of our margin container. So I'll rename it in the scene view to display container. So we want to connect our resource display to the player's inventory. So we can look through the game level scene if we wanted to, look through all the nodes and find a inventory node, which would mean a lot of redundant looking at other nodes in the scene that don't really have anything to do with our player. Or what we can do is give the player nodes a group, which is like a tag, and then we can search the nodes that have that tag player and only look at those nodes instead of looking at every node that's active in the scene. So to do that, we would go to the player node in the player scene in our project, go over to the node tab, and instead of signals, choose groups and give it the group player. So now we can search this node just by looking for the tag player. Let's go to resource display inside of here. And we'll have a function underscore ready. And first let's find the player. So the player is going to be of type player controller, but we haven't actually given the player script that class name. So let's give it class name. Or we could just call it player, actually. That's more consistent with the name of the script. So class name player. Now let's go over to resource display. So we're looking for a node that is of type player. And to find that, let's get the currently active tree. So that would be like the level or the main scene for the game. And we're going to look for a group. So if we look at groups, we can do get nodes in group, or we could get first node in group. So I'm writing this to be a single player game, and we would only expect it to be one player. So for that case, we'll just get the first node in the group. The group name is player. So we're going to get that player node there. So then we need to get access to the inventory, and we'll actually make that a member variable. So up here for our player inventory, which is going to be of type inventory. To find that player inventory, we need to search the player node. So player inventory is going to be equal to player.findChild. And the pattern we're looking for is inventory as a class name. And that should be as a inventory. This part's probably unnecessary, but it doesn't hurt. We're being very specific. We're looking for that inventory script, and we're setting it up there. Okay, then what we need to do is connect to the player inventory signal. But currently, there's no signal for inventory. So let's go to the inventory script and create one. So in the inventory script, let's write a signal. So to do that, we can do if our signal resource count changed. And that is going to mean that we need the type and the new amount. So type resource item. And then the amount is new count, which is going to be of type integer. So after we add resources, we want to emit that signal. So we can come down here below the if else and write emit signal. So the signal we are emitting is, of course, resource count changed. And then we pass in the parameters. So the type is type, and the count is the new amount. So that would be resources type, which is going to give the value associated with the key there. Now that we have the signal emitting, go back to resource display, and we can connect to that signal. So player inventory.connect. So we're connecting to whatever that signal was just called. Resource count changed. So just paste that in there. And then we need to give the callback methods. So we're going to have a function in here called on player inventory resource count changed. Okay, and now we just have to write that function. So add a couple new lines, and then function, let's just copy and paste this name. It's kind of long. So on player inventory resource count changed, and that's going to take the same parameters. So we have the type of resource item, and then we have the new count, which is an integer. And I guess this is going to be turned void, so we can specify that as well. Okay, next, let's make sure there's no errors. Okay, great. So let's change this pass and write a print. So new count for, and let's do type dot display name is going to be is, and then, well, we need to convert this integer into a string. So string new count. So as long as this resource display is active in the scene, we should be able to get this callback to run. So let's go to the game level, and we can add it in here. Maybe later we would have like a main scene load the level, and it would only have the resource display load once, not every time we load the level. But for right now, let's just, for the sake of simplicity, we'll add the resource display straight to the game level. So let's right click in here and add a child node. So we want a canvas layer. Usually you want this as the base for when you're adding UI controls to the scene. It'll keep the UI positioned in its place no matter where the camera is moving around in the scene. So if your UI is in the top left, it'll always stay in the top left no matter where the player and the camera goes. So canvas layer, and then let's add in our resource display. Just drag and drop an instance of the scene and then position it under canvas layer. Yep. And okay, and now that we have that active in the project, let's hit play. And let's see if we can get that callback to occur. Okay, so first off, in the scene displays, resource item display is an array of resource item display. So what's going on here is that this should be the type, not assigned. So we're going to put array resource item display over there and get rid of the equal sign. So by default, that's just going to be a empty array. Yep. Okay, now let's hit play and run that again. Okay, so scene runs. Let's see if we get the callback print messages when we pick up an item. So I'm going to come here. Okay, we have new count for rock is 1. So our UI is now responding to when we pick up items. So it knows what type and how many. So that's very good. That's what we need to start adding to the resource display UI. So we already have the display item template. First, we want to check in our array if a template that supports the specific type already exists, and then add the new count into that. And if there isn't one for that type coming in, then we create a new instance of the resource item display, and we set the type to the new type. So first, we'll find existing item display for type. If none exist, create a new one. Okay, so to find it, we have to do a var. So var current display, which is a type resource item display. So then we need to loop through the array. So for display in displays, if the display dot, let's see, resource type, I think that's what we want. Did I really make that a capital though? So let's go back and check that script. Resource item display. Let's open the scene. Let's look at the script. Yeah, I did actually. So let's make that resource underscore type be more specific. You know, just standard naming conventions. And let's go back here and do display dot resource type is equal to type. So if that's the case, then we've already found the current display. So current display equals this display, and we can break. So once we find the correct display, we no longer need to continue through the for loop. So then we're going to check if the current display was never found. So if current display is null, then we're going to create a new display. So we want to instantiate under the display container a new instance of this item display. So we're going to take, let's see, item display template. So var new display equals item display template dot instantiate. Okay, and then we need to set the parent to the display container. So display container dot add child new display. Okay, and yeah, I think the display container will take care of positioning it. So we just need to set the new values into that. Okay, so the new values is going to be, we set the resource type. So let's actually specify this as a resource item display so that we can see what member variables it has. And then we're going to instantiate as a resource item display. Okay, and now we can do new display dot resource type equals type. And then we'll say new display dot, I think I had a function update count. Yep, update count. And we're going to pass in the new count. Okay, great. So we just need to do the same thing up here if we have a current display. So we'll do current display dot update count new count. So here we create a new display and we set the resource type and update the count. And then here we find the display based on the resource type, and then we just update the count. Okay, so here we can say find existing display and update the count if one is found. Okay, so hopefully that's not too complicated there. Let's hit play and test it out. So we're going to go gather a resource and then boom. And then, okay, we have our display added to the top left-hand corner. The only thing that's a little weird here is that the margin did not seem to work. And I think I may have seen why that could be. So if we look at the game level and we look at our resource display, we'll see that the margin is actually going outside the bounds of our screen by the looks of it. So let's jump into here, take a look at the resource display. We got theme overrides. We got the display container. Could it be that this should be negative? No, that's not right. Okay, I guess we can hit play and we'll take a look at the remote views up here in the game level. So we take a look at the resource display, but we got to look at remote. So let's see, canvas layer, remote display, display container, and we have our resource item displays under here. Okay, that's kind of interesting though. We have two set here. All right, so that's definitely a bug. We get a new one added every single time. Yeah, okay, I think I forgot to add it to the array. So let's do that part first. So when we create a new display, we need to add it to the existing displays array. So displays dot append, and we're going to append the new display. Okay, that way, when we search through the array, the new display will show up. So it should only create it once. Let's hit play. Let's gather our stuff. Yeah, now that's working. Okay, so to fix the positioning on the resource display, let's go to resource display here and try making the anchors preset full rect Okay, so that should make it the full UI view of whatever we attach it to. So if we go to game layer, okay, that's actually kind of like what we just had. Let's see, let's check the layout. Transform. Oh, position -10, -10. Okay, that might be our problem here. So I'm going to reset that. Okay. Now the position is correctly in the top left. So let's hit play and we'll see if it actually positions things correctly. Okay, good. It is. That's nice. So now to demo that this will work with other types of resources, let's just create a wood resource and put one randomly on the map for us to pick up. Okay, so under items resources, let's create a new resource. So we're looking for item resource item. This will be resource wood.tres. So we just need a name and a texture. So this is going to be, and then the texture, let's go up to resources and we'll do wood brown. So maybe we rename this to be brown wood. You could call it whatever you want, really. Okay, and now we need a pickup object associated with that. So I'm going to duplicate this pickup rock as pickup brown wood. Let's double click into here. Let's change the resource type here to resource wood. And by the way, if you don't like how it shows the file name, like here in resource rock, you can set a name here, rock. You could go into resource wood and you could set brown wood here as well. So then when we look at our scene and it references it in the inspector, you'll see it referenced by name here instead. So you can hover over it and see it's resource wood.trs. Let's rename the pickup to be pickup wood. And then we need to change the texture to be our wood textures. Just put that there. And let's change the size of our collision to actually match our wood. So something like that is pretty good. Now let's put a couple inside of the scene. So first I'm gonna, first let's close a few of these tabs. Okay, and now let's go to the game level and let's drop some of these pickups in. So pick up brown wood, pick up brown wood, pick up brown wood. So now we have some extra pickups in the scene. Let's hit play. Now notice, because we didn't run the launch method on these pickups, that they just exist in the scene. They're not moving or anything. So let's go get this one. Okay, and I guess I didn't set a texture there. So I guess we still haven't set the texture here, but we should be able to get 2 to appear. So let's get 2. And we did get a second to appear in our grid, but it's not showing quite properly. But you can see how the first one had a 1 and now a 2, and the second one had 5. So at least it knows that the types are separate. Let's work on setting the texture. So in resource item display, let's jump into the script. We can just have a setter that whenever we set this resource type, we're also going to change the texture rect texture. So let's make a setter function here. So set new type, and that's going to mean resource type is equal to the new type, of course. But we also want to update the texture rect dot texture is going to be equal to resource type dot texture. Okay, now if we hit play, it should correctly display which item is which up here. Okay, and now we'll get the rock, and well, the rock's pretty big over there, but yeah, it's definitely showing the right texture at least. Now we just need to get the grid layout to work. So let's take a look at our resource display scene in 2D view, kind of zoom in here, and let's try dropping 2 items under display container. So resource item display and resource item display. Okay, so we can see they stack on top of each other here. Really, I guess what we need to do is that the resource display should be under the margin container. So let's make it so that the display container is actually the root scene. So right click, make scene root, and let's bring these 2 under the resources display. Okay, so that lays things out correctly. Now we can rename this to be grid, and we'll rename this to be resources display, or resource display actually. And then we're going to attach our resource display script to this node. We're going to remove it from the grid node. So let's remove it there. And then we just need to make it in the script so that we're taking this grid instead of the display container as a margin container, and we're going to add it to the grid. So grid is going to be a grid container. We're looking for $grid. All right, we could just make it grid container actually. And we'll rename it grid container as well in the scene view. Okay, so now a grid container, we just need to add the child to that instead. Okay, now let's go to play. Let's collect our resources. Oh, yeah, of course. So we have to change what this extends, which is margin container. Okay, now let's hit play. Let's go collect our resources. Instantiate on null value. Oh, right. Because we changed where the script is, we need to set this up again. So take the scene, resource item display, and put that in the slot here. In 2D view, also remove the test resource item displays. Okay, now finally we can go to play mode and we can pick up our items. So there's our first and there's our second. Okay, cool. So we're collecting different types of resources here. They're kind of big on the screen, but you can see how we can easily keep track of what resources we have. Now in your actual game, maybe put this in an inventory or something so you couldn't always see it, or we just shrink it down to the top left of the corner. I don't know if you want this to be more like an RTS or more like an RPG. But let's actually try to make that a lot smaller. Okay, so first off, the resource display, let's take the margin and make that 5. Since it's being amplified by 4 scale, it's really like 20 pixels when it's 5. And then let's make it so that each item is smaller. I'll add a couple test items back in here so that we can see what their size is. And then we're going to work on resizing those to be smaller. But let's start with the resource display size, and I'll make that, let's say, 26. So I want to take our resource item displays for the texture vect. I'm going to shrink that back down to keep size. So we'll just show the actual size of the sprite. And then we're going to need these labels to be much smaller as well. So on font size for theme overrides, I might take that, override it to something like 8. Okay, so I'm not really sure why the text down here kind of floats into the middle with this HBox container. I'm actually going to try changing the resource item display to a different type. Let's try changing it to a flow container. Let's see, a horizontal flow container. Yeah, let's try that. Okay, so that makes the text come up here. And I kind of want to shrink that if I can. So let's resize this. Yep. We can try something like that. Now let's go into the script and just make sure that we are using this type, which I think was horizontal flow container. So just change the script resource type. So next we'd like our texture to be centered with the text as well. Centered vertically, that is. So let's see if we can get that in layout. So if we do stretch mode, maybe we can do keep aspect centered. Okay, that actually seems like it's good. Keep centered or keep aspect centered. Let's try that. Keep aspect centered. Let's hit play. Okay, we see our items up there. We got our new resource we added in, and we can collect those resources. So that's looking pretty good. Not perfect, but it definitely works for right now. Okay, now we can go to resource display. Let's get rid of these default dummies and save the scene. Okay, so now let's go hit play one more time, collect the resources. And we can see that now that we have this display in the top left-hand corner, it's pretty obvious how much of each resource we have as we pick them up. So it would be a pretty useful indicator. You could also move this same thing into a pop-up window, like an inventory, when you press a key like I or something, if you'd rather it show up there rather than on the screen at all times. But that's pretty good for showing our collected resources.